Portland, Oregon. Her work spans a breadth of sectors and industries, including retail, e-commerce, healthcare, computer hardware and software, consumer technology, automotive, insurance, home improvement, and community development. In addition to freelancing, she has worked within corporate agency and startup design teams. She combines her anthropology training with a user-centered design approach to solve real problems, advocate for people and their values, and help businesses feel confident in their decisions. She received her MA in Applied Anthropology from the University of Memphis in 2011 and her BA in Anthropology from Eckerd College in 2009. She blogs about business, design, anthropology, and careers at www.anthropologizing.com. And without further ado, I will hand over the microphone to Amy.
All right, thank you so much, Vernon. I appreciate that really nice introduction, and I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop, which will show my slides. Okay, so can I get some confirmation that you can see my slides? Anyone? Vernon, are you able to see my slides?
I am, yes. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Yes.
No, I couldn't, but thank you for letting me know.
Okay.
Yes, Clara, thank you for chiming in, and everyone else. Okay, great. So I should probably be able to take up the full hour with my presentation, and then there's going to be a Q&A session at the end, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have about anything I discussed. And likewise, you can get in touch with me after the presentation. I'll have my contact info at the end in case you want to get in touch. So thank you again for joining me for this presentation. I'm really excited to talk to what seems like a somewhat diverse audience of anthropologists, professors, students, maybe some UX, design and business practitioners, kind of a good mix there. So I hope everyone's able to get something out of it, and I'll go ahead and start. The agenda I have set out for the presentation today will start with just a little bit about me, my background, my education, and career history so far. And then I'll get into the main topic of the presentation, looking at my work in UX design and business and how I'm applying an anthropological perspective and toolkit in my work. And given the time constraints today, I won't be able to get into too much detail about the work or different projects, so I'll kind of just show a variety of the things that I've worked on. And then I'll wrap up with some final thoughts on, what I've learned so far as an anthropologist working in this field of work. I'm also a huge fan of Twitter and conversations on Twitter about live events, conferences, and presentations and things. So if you'd like to live tweet or send me a message or a tweet over there, then you can do that at Amy Santee. And this webinar is graciously being hosted by the American Anthropological Association, and so you can tweet at them as well. Okay, so I'll start off with a bit about myself, starting with my kind of geographic journey that I've made so far in my life. I was born in Florida in St. Petersburg, and I went to undergrad at Eckerd College. And after undergrad, I made my way to Memphis, Tennessee for grad school at the University of Memphis. And following graduation and getting my master's in applied anthropology, I moved to Bloomington, Illinois, which is in central Illinois, basically, to work at State Farm Insurance. And then after that, I went to Portland, Oregon. So I've kind of made this interesting path across the country, lived in lots of interesting different places and worked at lots of different places. And so I've had a couple of jobs here in Portland and now am doing independent consulting. So here in Portland, I live with my partner, Isaac Sachs, and our herd of kitten children. And so from the top left, that's Albert. Over to the right, Adonis. The white cat in the bottom, I don't know if you could have guessed, but her name is Snowball. And the cat in the bottom left corner is Ernest. So that's our happy little family. And I just thought I'd share a couple of other non-professional, non-career related things about myself. I love TV and movies, and there's a lot of good stuff out there right now. I bet a lot of you have your Netflix and Hulu accounts that you're spending a lot of time with, just like me. Board games, kind of a lot of nerdy hobbies here. Gardening, food, and Portland is a really great place for food. It has a great and growing food community with lots of awesome restaurants. Anthropologizing is my blog, and so while that is related to professional interests, it's definitely something I spend a lot of time doing. It's a hobby of mine. And then public radio. I would say that's another thing I spend a lot of time doing as well, listening to NPR. One more quick tidbit about myself is that I knew I wanted to be an anthropologist when I was 14 years old. And this is a screenshot from the opening screen of this old computer game called Amazon Trail. And it's basically the same thing as Oregon Trail, except it's in the Amazon rainforest. And long story short, you meet an ethnobotanist, which is a subfield of anthropology, and I kind of got interested in that and very curious about what it was and started exploring it. And so that's my origin story as an anthropologist. And the last thing that I want to mention is that I'm a practicing anthropologist. So basically what that means is I apply my anthropology training to solve real-world problems and build a knowledge base through anthropology. So that's different from academic anthropologists who work in the academy, who teach and do research within universities. So my work is solely focused on practice, and then I occasionally, like to try to tie it back to the academy when I'm able. And so I mention this because this is the basis of my perspective and my experiences as an anthropologist. So just keep that in mind as we're going along. So I'll tell you some information about my educational and career history. And I've already touched on this a little bit in terms of where I've gone to school and where I've worked, but this is just another way of looking at kind of a timeline of that and the different milestones that have happened in my career so far, starting out with undergrad and going through the different jobs and roles that I've had. And what interests me about this is not just the different places that I've worked, but also the different roles that I've had. They have been very similar for the most part, but different in their own ways, and that has depended a lot on the context of where I worked. So working in a big corporation like State Farm versus a small design agency like Empirical, working at a startup that exists within a corporate setting at Spenwell, and now being on my own as an independent or freelancer, if you'd like to call it that. All of these have provided me with a lot of experiences and perspectives that have been really helpful. And the other way I like to look at this timeline is that my understanding of anthropology as a discipline and the practice of anthropology and how I look at my career and my role, these have evolved and grown over time. So my understanding has gotten better, starting with my foundational learning and my education, of course, but going into the real world, actually working, doing projects, having jobs. The way I think about anthropology now is definitely different from how I thought of it 2 years ago, 4 years ago, and even back when I started in 2004 as an undergrad. And this might seem like common sense, but I just find it helpful to remind myself that my understanding is always evolving. And so even in a year or two from now, I'll probably have a bit different of a perspective on things. Okay, so working in user experience, design, and business. And so my role is a user experience researcher, and there's a lot of different names and titles I can have. But I work in the context of design. I work within the design process, and I also work typically within business settings. So these all kind of go together. Okay, so my role, user experience researcher, and you might hear me refer to this as a UX researcher. It's just a shorthand way of saying user experience. I'm not sure why they chose UX. It could also be UE, but anyway, that's beside the point. So I want to start by talking about what user experience research actually is. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's research that is done to understand and inform the experiences people have when interacting with basically anything that other human beings create or design. And this can be a product, it can be a service, a social service, it can be a website, it can be a system within the government, a company system, a system of computers, technology. It's really applicable to pretty much anything that human beings create themselves, because they make decisions about how those things should be, and that's the act of design. And so one other thing I want to mention here that's important about this is the user experience research is done to not only understand these experiences and the people who use them and the context in which they exist, but also to inform these new experiences and to inform current experiences in the act of, evaluating and improving them. And user experience research is part of a broader approach to product design called user-centered design. And the central premise or the underlying driver of UCD is that people should be at the center of design, and the best products are designed with people in mind. And again, that might seem like common sense, especially if you're coming from an anthropology perspective, going to the people who are affected by decisions, participatory action research, participatory design, and things like that. But it's not as common as you might think, although it is becoming more common. So UCD puts people at the core of design decisions. So they're at the core in addition to, expertise from technology and design and product people. But UCD also considers everything about the people who are going to use a design or interact with a design. So what they need, what their goals are, what they're motivated by, what they value, and also their feedback on a product or on a service in order to make it more meaningful to them. So again, this seems pretty straightforward, but it hasn't always been done this way. These are some photos actually of places that I've worked. And for the most part, design and business decisions get made in places like these, in conference rooms, in cubicles, in big campuses, corporations, startups, places like that. And this is the traditional approach where decisions are made by experts, kind of in a top-down fashion. Again, that's something we talk about in anthropology, where decisions are made at the top rather than taking the time to talk to other people, understanding the people who are affected by decisions. And within design and business, experts are people like software engineers, marketing people, designers, and pretty much, operations, any other role that you can find in a business, those are experts. They're people who are really good at their jobs, they know what they're doing, but the difference with UCD is that it brings the external component into play. It puts people at the core of the process, again, valuing their feedback and bringing them in as a stakeholder with design and technology. And this is really one of the main reasons I'm attracted to this field of work, because I'm very interested in advocacy, advocating for people who may not have a voice in decisions. And in business and design, there are lots of ways to be an advocate. So this approach to design has been going on for a few decades. It's been called different things, and it's definitely still evolving. And it's really been picking up speed in the past 5 or 10 years, but there are still a lot of organizations who basically deny the value of including people in the process. On the flip side, you have companies like Google and Intuit, which makes TurboTax, and LinkedIn, and just numerous other Fortune 50 companies, startups, not to mention more and more government organizations and nonprofits who are adopting a user-centered design approach in their work. related to this is that a big part of my job is convincing people of the value of user-centered design, especially within organizations that are kind of behind the times. You know, organizations with people who want to do things kind of the old-fashioned way because it's more comfortable. And so that's a regular component to my work. All right, so I'll talk more about how I got interested in this line of work and got into it, actually kind of like the path I took. So first of all, it was not a straightforward path. This was not something I set out to do. I did not set out to go into user experience or design or business. In fact, I hadn't even heard the term user experience until I was in my first job at State Farm. So that was well after graduate school. At least a few months into my first job, I started learning about user experience. But backing up a little, as an undergraduate, I was broadly interested in culture and anthropology in general, like many of us. And during this time and through grad school, I realized that I really liked doing qualitative research, and I was good at it. And that's pretty much the main thing I do today. There's a lot of other components to this type of role, but that's one of my main skill sets. And so that, I would say, is the beginning of going on this path. In grad school, I focused on doing applied research into social issues like poverty, healthcare, community development, and was very interested in those things, of course. And I also took a class from Dr. Carrie Brando at University of Memphis called Culture and Consumerism. And I started to get interested in the topic and learned at a very high level just the basics about how anthropology can be applied to studying consumer culture and the systems that exist to create goods and just all those different really interesting things, but from an anthropological perspective. And of course, the recession definitely played a role, because when I graduated with my master's, I basically would have taken any job I could get my hands on. There were not a lot of jobs. I didn't really have that much experience. It was 2011. And so my point there is that I got a couple job offers, and the best job offer I got at the time was to work at State Farm as a consumer research analyst. You know, they were looking for entry-level researchers. They were interested in my background in anthropology and, you know, again, my qualitative research skill set. And so it was a great fit, and I was really excited to go into my first job. When I was at State Farm, I worked in the research department with lots of different types of people, but some of the people I got to work with were user experience and usability people. And working with them, I just found this to be a really interesting area of practice in terms of using my skills and impacting product design and services and websites and all of that fun stuff. And it also sounded way more exciting than traditional market research and consumer research. And that could have been my path as well. But I saw differences in those in a number of ways, which I think will surface during the rest of the presentation. But I saw enough differences to decide to pursue the user experience and design path. And so I began to explore user experience further. I moved to Portland and looked for UX jobs, and I was lucky enough, I guess, to get one because there weren't a lot of them. I got one at a small design agency called Empirical, and at that point I basically just jumped in and learned as I went along. I did a lot of learning on the job. I started going to more professional events, joined groups, read a ton of stuff, and I do all these things still because there's so much more to learn. You know, networking, talking with UX people and things like that. And so at this point, it was pretty clear to me that I wanted to do user experience for a few different reasons. Again, applying my anthropology training to my work, that was really important to me. Impacting business, impacting design, you know, seeing the fruits of my labor, knowing that my work actually means something and it's going towards solving problems. Being at the forefront of design and technology and working on really interesting things, that's really exciting. Working with a lot of amazing, talented people in lots of different roles and learning from those people. And the last thing for me is that this type of work is growing in demand. And so it seems like a safe bet in terms of job security. So I want to show the definition of user experience research one more time, just because the next few slides are going to be focusing more on this. So again, it's research that is done to understand and inform the experiences people have when interacting with a product, service, or system. So there's a number of different questions that UX or design research, as some people call it, seek to address. So some of these things are, who are the people who use our product or service, or the people who might use it at some point? What are these people like? What are the things that they care about? What are their lives like? What are their needs, their preferences, the things that they value most? And what are their goals and motivations? If you're looking at a particular product or a potential product that doesn't exist, you can ask how the product or service might solve the problems of the target audience. So you have a group of people, if you understand their problems enough, then your product should be designed to solve those problems. And if it doesn't, if it's not designed in that way, it's probably going to fail. Related to the previous point, what could an organization do to make their product or service relevant and meaningful to a group of people? And relevant and meaningful basically means valuable. How do you provide value to others? Along the lines of usability, we might ask, is the product, is the website, the service, whatever it might be, is it usable? Can people actually use it and achieve their tasks and their goals without getting frustrated, without exiting, without throwing the thing out the window? Is it learnable? Can people understand quickly how can they learn it quickly, and can they understand how to use it? And if there's a product that currently exists, how are people currently interacting with it? What is that current experience like? And then you can figure out what you're doing well and what things need to be improved. So when I'm doing research, when anyone is doing UX research, the outputs or deliverables, the information that we give to other people in the form of findings, insights, and other types of tools, those things go into the design and business process, and they're used for, the intention is for them to be used in design and business decision making, essentially. So my role essentially is to provide information that other people can use to make decisions and hopefully create good user experiences. I have a list here of 10 outcomes of doing user experience research. And these are not, you know, results like reports. That could be an outcome or a result of doing research, but these are a little bit more, I'm not sure, but let me just go ahead and start with the first one. So the first outcome of UX research, and this is actually one of the most important ones for me, is getting people who exist outside of a company or an organization, getting those people at a seat at the table with business and technology. So when you're in business, you talk a lot about stakeholders, and there's different stakeholders within your organization from the business side and the design side and the technology side. And in my mind, I think it's really important to bring in people from outside the company or the organization, the user, as many people refer to them, get them a seat at the table and see them as an equal stakeholder. So another outcome, design or improve a product or service based on an understanding of the people who interact with it or who could potentially interact with it. And I talked a little bit about that just a few minutes ago. Outcome number 3, make sure the things we design actually meet people's needs and actually solve their problems and fit into their lives in a relevant and meaningful way. As all of you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't really solve a problem, it doesn't really meet a need, it kind of just exists because it can, or someone decided that we could do this, we have the technology and the ability, so why not? And a lot of that stuff isn't very valuable and relevant. So it's kind of one of my goals is to make sure that we're doing the opposite. So number 4, validating and disproving assumptions. So we always have assumptions in design and business about how things should go, and some of them are right and some of them are wrong. And research is a way to make sure we are understanding which ones are right and which ones are wrong, and making changes based on what we learn. And so that's essentially the act of designing based on data and information, not guessing at something, not assuming, and not just relying solely on our expertise, but again, talking to people and learning about them. Outcome number 5, identify problems and opportunities that are not obvious. And so, you know, in organizations, we might think we know everything that's happening, but if we do some research, we might find out that there's a whole unexplored area we need to look into, or new product opportunities, or problems with a website that we didn't know existed. Outcome number 6, have a better idea of how to design a product or service and know what not to do. And that kind of relates to previous points, but again, knowing what direction to go in, what's going to be, what will make people the most happy, what will make the business money, you know, trying to help everyone who is involved achieve their goals, but also knowing the direction that you don't want to go in. So if you learn something in research, it might tell you we should choose, you know, route A and not route B. Number 7, providing direction for design and business decisions to do a couple things here: minimize risk in business and decision making, increasing and maximizing success based on your decisions, and differentiating an organization or a company from competitors. Related to that, for number 8 is saving money. And it's been shown time and time again that if you wait to fix things, you know, after you put a product out, and there's been many examples in history of this, or if you put a website out like healthcare.gov, or if you put a particular car out and there's something wrong with it, and it can come down to little products too. It doesn't have to be big stuff like that. It's more expensive to fix things afterwards than to identify problems ahead of time, get feedback ahead of time, and then fix them before you put them out. Number 9, this is another really important one. UX research helps us remind ourselves that we are not designing for ourselves. And this happens at a lot of organizations and companies, especially technology ones, where you might be working on an app, a website, or any other kind of product, and you might feel the urge to design it in the way that you would want to use it, or to make yourself happy as a user of that product. But it's important to make sure that we understand who the users actually are, who potential audiences are for a product or service, and to make sure we design for those people as well. And number 10, the last outcome for UX research, is building a culture of empathy within organizations. And this is another one I have on here that's really important to me, because organizations that have empathy for other people who are affected by their decisions are going to be more successful. If you ignore feedback and perspectives of those folks, then you're kind of just going to go in the wrong direction. You're going to end up putting stuff out there that isn't valuable. And empathy is really understanding your user or other people who you're designing for to the point that you make decisions based on what they care about, even if you disagree with their rationale. All right, so I bet you're wondering how anthropology fits into all of this, and hopefully I've touched on that a bit so far, but I want to talk some more about it. So anthropology is the study of the human experience. I think that's the most simple definition that you could have for anthropology and what it's all about. It's about understanding people, their experiences, and their lives. And so the more you understand the people you're designing for, the more valuable and useful and relevant your products and services will be. And of course, anthropologists, we're trained to do this, and typically we do it really well, and we do it in a really unique way compared with people from other disciplines. So, and of course, you know, we're not the only ones who can contribute in this way, but we definitely have a valuable and unique perspective to contribute. So my point here is if you take anthropology and you add it to design and business, what you're going to get is going to be really beneficial to everyone. And there are, this is just a snapshot of some of the books that I have related to doing anthropology and business in its various, in various ways. It could be organizational studies, it can be design ethnography, it can be or just any aspect of doing anthropology in consumer research and user experience and all of that. There are tons of resources out there that talk about all of these different things, and I definitely encourage you to check them out. And also I can share, later on, I can share some of the resources that I like the most, other blogs and books and things like that. And these resources, they talk about all the different types of work you can do, methods, how you can apply theory, different roles that you can be in, and lots of other things. But what I'll be focusing on for the rest of the presentation is what we bring to the table in terms of a few different things: perspective, approach, skills and tools, and then I'll talk about some project examples to showcase the breadth of the kind of work that you can do. So when I say perspective, an anthropological perspective, these are some of the things that come to mind for me. Looking at things holistically, having empathy for others, being able to interpret cultural or social perspectives, a cross-cultural perspective or comparing, being people-centered, having both an insider and outsider perspective at the same time. I think that's one of our key attributes is, you know, we go to work at an organization, we're technically an insider because we work there, but we kind of always, at least for me personally, and probably many other anthropologists, we maintain an outsider perspective at the same time because that's what our training has provided us. Having a healthy skepticism when it comes to decisions, perspectives, just, you know, asking questions and making sure you get to the root of things. Being detail-oriented, oriented towards process, oriented towards getting results, at least from an applied anthropology perspective when working on projects. Being open-minded, wanting to be value-added, so joining a team or joining a project and wanting to bring the value of anthropology to that project. Also a contextual perspective, so looking at the context in which things exist, not just looking at things in and of themselves. Of course, curiosity. I think every anthropologist is curious. And also we bring a set of ethics, which stem in part from the different organizations that we may or may not belong to, American Anthropological Association, Society for Applied Anthropology, and then also just developing our own ethical perspectives as we go along. So next is approach, the anthropological approach. So the things that I think of when I think of what's unique about our approach is it's critical. So asking questions, not just taking things for face value. Iterative, solving problems and asking questions in an iterative cycle. I'm trying to think of an example for that. So basically, iteration means you do things over and over until you get to the right point. You test out a hypothesis until you find the answer, for example. You have a design, you do some research on it, you improve that design, and then you throw it back out and get some more information on it. Creative, being creative in many different ways with our projects, being resourceful. Systematic, so when we're doing our work, we don't kind of just make things up willy-nilly, but we try to follow a process as much as we are able to and follow systematic standards for doing things. Advocacy, advocating, and this doesn't apply to all anthropologists, but many of us feel like we want to use our work to advocate for people, again, who may not have a say in decisions. We have a very collaborative approach typically, at least that's the way things are typically done these days with the changing career landscape, more people moving out of academia, working on teams. Participatory in the sense that we value the participation not just of experts and just anthropologists, but people from other disciplines, people in communities, and getting everyone's perspective involved. Multi-method in the sense that we don't just rely on one method for doing things. We have a whole toolkit of skills and tools and ways of doing things that we can rely on. So on the right column here, inductive and deductive, and these are essentially approaches to research that I won't get into too much detail, but there are two ways of doing things. Inductive is going into research without preconceived notions and letting the data that you find tell you what you're seeing and coming up with frameworks to describe it. Deductive is more like doing the opposite, where you go in with a theory or a hypothesis about something and you try to find information that either fits or negates that notion. Immersive, we are willing to immerse ourselves in cultures that are different from our own, and this is really important in going out into the working world, and definitely very interesting in design and business. I mentioned this before, but we are very resourceful with tight timelines and budgets and things like that, being able to still get good information. Engagement, so engaging with others, whether that's stakeholders, community members, our colleagues at work, making sure it's not just a lone wolf approach anymore, it's definitely a collaborative, engaged one. And three more here, so problem solving. That's pretty self-explanatory, but using anthropology to solve problems. Systems thinking, so looking at how things are interconnected, how they're related to one another within an organization, within a group of people that you're studying, not just looking at things by themselves. And knowledge building. So we're interested not only in solving problems, but building knowledge around the practice of our work. So the last set of points here is about the skills and tools we have. And obviously, anthropologists come out of school with knowledge about anthropological theory, concepts, and research methods. But we also know about telling people stories. We have the skill of solving problems, which I think I mentioned previously. Rapport building, so making connections with other people, making sure that they trust us. That's really important to do when you're doing research. Learning, we're always willing to learn, and we know we have to learn in order to understand new domains and solve problems. We're very observant. We know how to plan projects. We know how to analyze things with different frameworks, with different perspectives. We're very good at listening to other people and understanding what they're telling us. Managing projects and managing ourselves, so making sure we get things done in a certain amount of time, which there is a bit of a transition, of course, from school to the working world in that regard, but you pick up on it pretty quickly. Digging deep into questions, so not just accepting what we see in front of ourselves, but digging a little bit deeper and asking why over and over again until we're satisfied with the answer. Related to analysis is pattern recognition, understanding and framing problems, so understanding what the problem is that you're trying to solve. It may not be what you initially set out to solve. Or if you're working with a stakeholder in your company, they might say, I have this problem, can you do some research and help me figure out what's going on or help me find an answer? And oftentimes what they think the problem is not actually the problem and not actually what you end up going out to research. And then making sense of complexity. people are very complex, culture is very complex, and so anthropologists are trained to do that as well. And this is one thing that kind of relates to what I've been talking about is research methods. And so I'm a UX researcher, and these methods should look fairly familiar to most of the people who are watching, especially anthropologists or anthropology students. You learn a lot of these things when you're in school, but then designers, UX people would also recognize these things. And this was the easiest way for me to connect my anthropology education and my job as a UX researcher, these methods for understanding the human experience and how people, again, interact with design. All right, so I have a few project examples that I'm going to cover. And I want to preface by saying that, again, there's an infinite variety of work that you can do in user experience and in design and business. So a lot of my work has been done for technology clients in different industries, and that's kind of just, I think there's two things to that. One is that's the direction I ended up going in. It's very interesting, and there are jobs in technology for this kind of work. And the other thing is that, well, it relates to that, which is that technology has pretty much been the leader in adopting user-centered design and user experience approaches. So it just kind of makes sense that most of the jobs would be there. I'm happy to know, though, that more and more organizations outside of technology and outside of business are looking at user-centered design, and I would definitely be interested in working, in a nonprofit or a government agency just as much. And so before I go into the examples, I'm not going to be able to go into the details of the projects just because we don't have a lot of time. But again, I'm happy to answer any questions about the projects, about the process I followed, the methods, the goals, my role in particular at the end, or if anyone wants to get in touch. All right, so this first example, what I did here was usability testing and interviews for the redesign of a software that allows people to edit medical terminology. And I know that sounds kind of boring, but what I really liked about this project was how complex it was. The software is only used by, I don't know, 40 people in the entire world, so it's really specialized. It's really complex. It was designed 1 million years ago by engineers, and they kind of just did their best job at putting it together. And finally, the people, the client, decided that they wanted to make some changes. So that was a really interesting project for me. I have a local wine shop nearby that I worked with to understand the wine shop customer experience. And I actually did this through a survey. And I don't do a lot of surveys in my work. Most of my work is qualitative, interviews, observational usability tests, things like that. But this is definitely one way that you can get information for designing or improving experiences in retail with software, hardware, whatever it might be. This is actually a project from back in grad school. The University of Memphis has a really great applied program where you get to do an applied thesis, or they like to call it a practicum. And so I did a couple projects for the Urban Child Institute, which is a nonprofit in Memphis, and one of them included an ethnographic study of the relationship between social capital and health. Another project I've done in the automotive space was, and I can't go into really any detail about it, unfortunately, but we were essentially testing out a new prototype and doing some interviews with vehicle owners in Shanghai, China, which was one of the target markets for this particular client. I've done, I don't know how many, just numerous usability and UX research studies for lots of different mobile and desktop hardware. So many that I won't really, I don't need to name any here, but I've had the fortune to work on lots of different devices, phones, tablets, laptops, two-in-ones, you name it. And related to that, this is another hardware project. I did a really interesting study on styluses, so digital styluses that you would use with a mobile device or a computer, but particularly looking at people who use it for productivity, art, and design. This was a really fun one that I did in store where I did kind of observational interviews and one-on-one interviews with people to learn about area rugs, the area rug shopping experience. And I can't forget about my first job at State Farm. I don't have any photos or anything from that time, but I got to do some really interesting projects there too. One of them was an ethnography in insurance agent offices in Oklahoma for a couple weeks. That was really interesting. I worked to help improve the work process of people who worked in call centers to not only improve their experience as employees, but also the people who called into the call center. I definitely did a lot of work on the website and mobile app as well for, you know, shopping for and purchasing different types of insurance. And also a couple projects for naming new products. And I think this is one of the last ones. I did a couple of years ago an exploratory study of Android developers in 3 different countries. We were, again, this was very exploratory, so we were just trying to understand this group of people, you know, how they work, how they get things done, what their goals are, their challenges as Android developers. So the research for Germany actually did remotely, so I did all remote interviews. I was able to travel to China, hence all of the photos, and a colleague traveled to Brazil. But it was a really interesting cross-cultural project on a very interesting topic. All right, and last but not least, Spendwell is a healthcare startup that I was working at until fairly recently. It was pretty much the best job I've ever had, in part because I had a really great team that I worked with, but also because the product, which is this website, was really interesting. It basically allows people to shop for health services online. They can know the cost of their services up front. There's nothing hidden. They can buy services directly from providers. And on the flip side, providers are able to list their services at the prices that they want and get access to people who will, there's no question as to whether or not they're going to pay their bill because they pay up front. So a company and startup here in Portland, but I did a lot of different UX and usability studies for the site, and also studies looking into the 2 user groups we had, which were healthcare seekers and healthcare service providers. All right, so it's looking like we have about roughly 10 minutes left, so I'll try to speed things up a little bit here. So to close, I'd like to talk about the things that have helped me along the way. Because for most people going into user experience, at least from Anthropology, and going into design and business, that's not a direct path. There's only a few schools that prepare students for this kind of work. So I've pretty much had to figure things out for myself, of course, with the help of friends and colleagues and mentors and all of the resources that are out there. So I thought it would just be helpful for me to talk about what has helped me along the way. So learning skills that Anthropology didn't teach me, there's definitely a lot of that involved when it comes to business and design. Essentially immersing myself as much as I can at every opportunity within this field of work so I can learn more and meet more people. collaborating with other roles like designers and developers and business people, it just opens up a whole new world of ideas and language and ways to get things done. Going to any kind of event related to UX and design that I'm able to. You can take workshops and, again, network with people. Understanding business culture and accepting it. And those are different things, and you can choose to do one or the other. But, you know, at first I wasn't sure how I felt about business culture, but then I just realized it's just another culture made up of other people, and this is how things are done. So I think taking that perspective really helps, has helped me work in this particular field. Adapting the methods and approaches that I've learned in school and that I've picked up along the way. Being able to explain research to non-researchers, that's something I have to do pretty regularly, especially now as a consultant where I'm trying to get new clients. Many of them haven't worked with researchers before. Also learning to convince people to pay for research. That's, you know, there are opportunities out there for research and research jobs, but a lot of the time you still have to convince people it's of value. Making sure my work is actionable, as they say. That's kind of a buzzword right now. It just means providing information that other people can take action on and that they can use. Getting as much variety and experience, roles, and industries as I'm able, that has been very helpful. Being flexible and being okay with uncertainty, because things happen really quick in business, but they also happen really slowly, if that makes sense. And reminding myself that I'm not there to be an anthropologist, I'm there to fill a business need. A business hires me to solve their problem. A business doesn't hire me to be an anthropologist. And that was kind of a tough thing to realize at first, but it's definitely true. And then letting go of what I think the ideal is for my projects. That you can never do the ideal. You never have enough time. You never have enough money. So letting go of that is also helpful. And so I have a few, to close, I have a few myths that I think come up sometimes for people when they think about being an anthropologist in business, working in companies and things like that, or even just doing applied anthropology or practicing anthropology. So the first one is, the first myth is applied anthropology isn't theoretical enough. That's just not true. You can get as much theory going on as you want in applied anthropology, or as little as you want. Another myth, applied anthropology isn't intellectually stimulating. I don't know, maybe my presentation has been able to convince you otherwise, but I'm definitely learning things every day, and I'm being challenged every day, and I just love it. So I would say that is not true. Academic anthropology is pure anthropology. This is another myth that unfortunately is still being perpetuated out there in certain universities, that applied anthropology is some kind of impure or illegitimate form of doing anthropology. That's just like old-fashioned, and if anyone says that, they're wrong. All right, so business, there's some myths around business too. Many anthropologists, and especially anthropology students, including myself back then, I thought, oh, you know, business is evil, corporations are evil, and I would be a traitor if I went to work in that field, and I still hear people saying that. And I just want to say, none of these things are true. It depends on the perspective you take. You can choose to work for certain companies. You can avoid working for certain companies or people that you don't match your values, and it's just a personal decision. Myth number 5 is that you can't make any money doing anthropology. That's definitely not true. There are lots of opportunities that could help you live the lifestyle that you want, but also, you know, pay your student loans and not have to scrape by. And the last myth that I wanted to sell, Florida doesn't need more anthropologists. This is something that Governor Scott Walker said a couple of years ago. And not only is he wrong about Florida not needing more anthropologists, but you know, the country and the world could use more anthropologists, not just in business and design, but in any field. So to finish out here, I feel like this career path has afforded me the opportunity to do really meaningful work. And I've had to kind of, you know, figure out what that means to me and what opportunities would let me do that. But I've been able to use my anthropology training to solve challenging problems. I get to be creative and work with technology, work with really cool people. I get to have a direct impact with my work to help design things that are awesome and valuable and that meet real needs and solve real problems. Again, this is a big one for me. I get to advocate for people and convince others that they need to listen and value different perspectives. And I get to help businesses succeed in a competitive world. So I encourage any students who are listening to explore a career path like this one in user experience, design, and business. If there are any professors listening, I encourage you to learn more about this field and to talk to your students about it. And if there's anyone in business or design listening, please consider hiring more anthropologists. All right, I think that is it.
Okay, well, thank you, Amy. That was a terrific presentation, and we will open the floor now to questions. If you would like to, if you're in the audience and you would like to put your questions into the feedback or the question and answer box there, we can go ahead and get those to Amy and try to have her answer them.
So do you want me to check the box and answer whatever questions come in, or do you want to let me know what questions come in, or how do you want to do it?
Can you see the box?
Yeah, let me get out of my presentation.
Okay. Yeah, if you can see the box, you can just go ahead and take the questions there.
Okay. And do we have a time limit? Can we go a few minutes over?
We could go as long as you would like to, as long as you're willing to go, and folks can sign off when they're no longer able to be with us. Sure.
Okay. Let's see. So there's a question from Lori. There are clearly a number of reasons to use the phrase user-centered design rather than human-centered design. Would you please share your reasons for using this term, and is the term proprietary? No, those are essentially interchangeable, and I might have and likely did use both of them during the presentation, and I think of them as the same. I like human-centered design because it's about humans, people-centered design. User-centered design is fairly common, though, in user experience because we talk about users a lot. And some people don't like the word user, some people don't care, some people, they don't think about it. I kind of go back and forth. I try to use people for the most part, but I use user and just try to, explain what I mean if that's necessary. So, like I said, I think those are interchangeable. All right. Kyle asks, how did you build and structure your portfolio given your anthro background? Seems like many of the website portfolios I've seen lean heavily on graphic design and web programming skills and de-emphasize research. That is an awesome question. So I do have a portfolio on my site, and I realized very quickly that if I wanted to be able to get jobs, I needed to show people, I needed to visually show people and tell people about my work. And essentially a research portfolio is based on projects and case studies and process, the research process. That's what people are most interested in. And it's definitely helpful if you can visualize things, put pictures. You don't have to be an amazing visual designer, but you tend to pick up on some of those skills, and you start to value visual design more anyway, because a lot of the people you work with are designers, and so that kind of just happens naturally, I think, if you take this career path. And then there was a follow-up question about portfolio samples and how long and in-depth they should be. If it's on your website, they shouldn't be very in-depth. They should just be kind of the basics. You can look at mine for an example, but there's just a few photos and a description of what the problem was, the process that I took, and what the results were, that sort of thing. And then if you're doing an interview, you can go into more detail. Oh, shoot. It's not Scott Walker. Who is the governor of Florida? I was
Rick
thinking
Scott.
of Rick Scott. Yes, Rick Scott. Well, I don't really like Scott Walker either, but that's beside the point.
The Republicans all
Rick
kind of
Scott.
look alike, huh?
Yeah, Rick Scott. I seem to confuse them, all the time, actually. And thank you, Kathleen, for mentioning that. Okay, so let's see. Kyle, I see other questions, but I want to get to other people, so email me with your other questions if you want. Michael, can you expand on your approach as a solo practitioner to convincing people to pay for research? That could be a really long response, but I guess what I'll focus on is you have to know what the value of research is to companies. It helps to have examples of companies or products that were made more successful with research. You basically need to know, you need to sound like you know what you're talking about. You need to speak the language of your clients, of your stakeholders within your company. You have to understand what their problems are and you have to present a plan for how you're going to solve those problems with research. So again, I could go on and on about that, and if you want to contact me later, you can. Let's see. Rosalind says she's been looking into user experience jobs, and they often seem to require coding, technical engineering background. No, it depends on the user experience job. So user experience encompasses a lot of different things. You can be a designer. You can be different types of designers: visual design, interaction design, motion design. You can be an information architect, a content strategist, a researcher like myself. And then there's some people who do all of those things. It just depends on the background that you come from. So I would say to focus on your skill set and the things that you know how to do already, and to shape your own UX career path. And then, go to school and read about the things that you don't know how to do. You don't necessarily need coding or developing experience, although it can be helpful if you do. Let's see. There's quite a few more questions, so I'm just going to keep going.
Please do. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, sure. Let's see, Ryle Nolan says, can you talk about how training might be improved based on your experience? That's a pretty big and broad question as well. I think it helps to, it was helpful for me to go to an applied program because we talked about applying anthropology to solving problems specifically. The difference for me was that my program didn't have the domain or field that I ended up working in, and that's not the fault of my program, it's just that I discovered it later on. So in terms of improving training, I think the most important things could be for programs to make sure students get hands-on, class-based, or outside the classroom experience with doing whatever type of work they're interested in. It could be business and design, or it could be healthcare, or whatever it might be. I think that was a very helpful aspect of the University of Memphis program, being able to do hands-on projects. Learning how to communicate information to people outside of academia and outside of anthropology. So it's not just about writing papers, and it's not just about doing bullet point presentations. There's so many other ways that you can communicate information to people, and I think that's something that training programs could provide a little bit more, is what are those other methods? Part of that is going to involve anthropologists and professors also learning those things, which they may or may not. Being in academia, you do things in a certain way. It doesn't mean that your students are going to do things in that way, though. So I would say that applies to any approach that a program takes to teaching students. Think about what is going to be useful for them, and most of them are not going to end up in academia. I guess that's the key thing. Let's see. Sarah, how did you make the transition from working for business to consulting? Well, even though user experience jobs are increasing, certain markets don't have as many jobs. So like the Bay Area, San Francisco, New York, and other places, there's tons and tons of jobs. But here in Portland, it's not as mature of a market, and so there are fewer companies with full-time roles. And the reason I left my last job was because of a layoff. And so when I was looking for a new job, there just weren't any. And I decided, well, I need to make money. I need to keep getting experience. I'm just going to try this consulting thing out. And so that was kind of the impetus of making that decision. And I definitely would consider working within an organization again. It's a really rewarding thing to work with people every day and work towards building something. And, you know, the social aspect, of course. But that's kind of the reason why I went in that direction. Let's see, Sarah also asked, what are some of the more tangible research techniques that you did not learn in anthropology but are key to your UX work? Well, the slide that I showed with the methods, I pretty much use all of those, but there are some variations. For example, usability testing, where you have someone use a website, an app, a product, and you assign them tasks to do to understand if they're able to complete them, if they struggle, if they get frustrated and want to quit, and kind of evaluate your product from that perspective. So that is not something I learned in anthropology training, but I was able to at least apply approaches like interviews and probing, you know, asking probing questions and things like that. That's helpful in usability testing. But that would be an example for you, Sarah. Let's see. Okay, Lance asks, how do I give myself experience and or scholarly background to apply for both applied anthropology jobs in the private sector and academia? Well, I would say, I mean, if it were me, I would try to decide between one or the other, because it can be hard to be in both places. Now, that said, there are people who are professors and they also consult for private sector clients. There are also companies out there, for example, Intel, which is here in the Portland area, they employ a lot of anthropologists with PhDs who came from academia, and their practice of anthropology and their role within that company is very reflective of that. So I think maybe you could look into doing it in that way, but you could also just decide between one or the other and see how it goes. Let's see. So Stephen asked, what were some of the challenges you faced applying for jobs when you were making the transition from a market research role to a UX role? Well, I think the main challenge was that I didn't have a ton of quote-unquote UX or, you know, usability experience. I was able to get on some projects like that at State Farm just accidentally, or maybe it was because they knew I had a qualitative research skill set, and so, you know, that's very applicable to those. So I kind of just fell into that and was able to say, hey, I have some experience, but, you know, the role I went into, it was fairly entry-level still. You know, I had a year and a half of experience before I got my first official UX role. So the experience helps, and being able to draw parallels and draw lines between your skill set that you're trained in, any experience you have, and user experience. And one thing I will say is I know tons of people who go into user experience and they don't have a UX background. There aren't really very many, if any, degrees in user experience. There might be a couple. There are other degrees that are very applicable, like user-centered design or human-computer interaction or other things. But people come from all different disciplines. So I guess my point is that there are lots of people trying to just make their way into UX, and there are lots of people who are open to accepting those folks who may not have UX experience, but who have applicable skill sets. Claire asks about participant recruiting and my relationships with participants in different projects. I'm not exactly sure what the question is asking, but I think I'll take a stab at it. So when you're recruiting participants for projects, typically you work with a firm that helps you to recruit those people. Some people do it themselves, and you can do it through social media, you know, friends and family, which I don't always suggest. There's lots of methods for you to do it yourself, but oftentimes, and hopefully you have it in your budget to pay a firm that specializes in recruiting to get people for you, and you pay them. And I like to pay people a good amount of money because I'm, you know, getting valuable information from them, and I'm using their time, and they're sharing their time with me. So I'm not really sure what else to say about recruiting. I think the other thing I can add is I always use consent forms. So people consent to participate in my research, and also non-disclosure forms if I'm working on a prototype or something that isn't, you know, out in the public yet. So there's lots of different processes, but I would say too that there's different companies have a different approach to doing that sort of thing. So I've picked up on a lot of different ways and have developed my own that I like to follow. Let's see, Ushma says, great presentation. I'm the director of meetings for AAA, and growing our meeting more to attract practicing anthropologists is a goal of mine. Is there anything else that we can provide at our meetings that would help attract the practicing folks? Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me is that I can't afford to go to a lot of conferences. Companies, it depends on where you work, but some companies don't have the budget for that. And personally, I end up paying a lot out of pocket for that. So I don't know. I mean, money should go to really important things like getting students to conferences and people from different countries and all that stuff. But I don't know, maybe there could be some kind of funds. Definitely more sessions that are about applied work. I know there are more of those, but the more the better. Workshops, learning skills, that's another way I decide about attending conferences is if I go to a conference, am I going to be able to learn things and not just sit in paper sessions and have people read papers, but like, is it a workshop? Is it interactive? Am I going to learn a new skill? Or networking opportunities. I think that's another thing that I look for is ways to meet people. The thing about AAA is that it's a very broad conference. So for me right now in my career, I'm looking more for very specific conferences. And EPIC, which is which came out of, you know, Anthropology and the AAA, is a good example of an anthropology conference that has a very specific focus of doing ethnography in business and design. There are a lot of questions here, so I'm kind of just picking a few, and I think I'll be able to go for a few minutes more, but there are quite a bit. So again, if I don't answer your question, my apologies. Please feel free to email me or call me or get in touch in any way, and I'll be happy to answer your question. So Deborah, she's a professor, and she says that she's interested in learning more so she can open this up to her students and maybe even get into it herself. So is it possible to enter straight from academia, and how would you suggest doing that? Like I mentioned earlier, there are companies that are more open to people who have very good academic credentials and are very knowledgeable about particular areas, or you know, have a lot of academic experience doing projects and research. But so that's one opportunity. And there are folks that I meet from time to time who want to go from academia to practicing in business, design, user experience, whatever it might be. And I think it's just kind of the same thing that I talked about earlier, which is understanding how your skills and your perspective fits into the kind of work you want to do. And, you know, being able to say, hey, yeah, this was an academic project. I did it in academia. However, I see the applied value of it, or here's what we learned. Here's the process that I took and the methods and the constraints that I dealt with, and just try to communicate those things that you did and that you learned in terms of what someone in a business or other organization would care about. And, you know, typically if you can do that and you're passionate and really interested in going into that field, people are pretty open to taking folks like you on. Rima says that she majored in cultural anthropology and has mainly worked in policy research and is interested in switching to UX. And she asked, would you recommend someone to pursue an internship in UX before pursuing a full-time job? If you can get an internship, well, okay, let me back up. So internships is a controversial topic, of course, and you know, if you can get a regular job first, then take the regular job. Like I was just saying, people from all different disciplines and all experience levels go into UX all the time, and that's the great thing about it. Of course, there are other positions that require a lot of experience with design and all of that. So I would say if you can get the regular job first, great. If you can't, try to find an internship that will pay you and really value your experience and your knowledge, and not just kind of see you as a person to do the mundane tasks, but, you know, a place where you'll be able to get real-world experience. So yeah, if that's your only option, then that's definitely not a bad thing. Chris asks about examples of how my work impacted a design change, and yeah, I have tons of those. You can go to my website and look at the case studies, or you can email me and I can tell you about some specific examples. Deborah is asking about how much of the work I do is collaborative in terms of developing research design. Yeah, some projects I'm the only researcher, and like, you know, I'm working by myself and doing every aspect of the project. Other projects I work on a team of researchers, and we split up the tasks of, you know, designing the research collaboratively, recruiting people, working with the clients. I've also, like back at Spenwell, the team that I worked with of designers and developers were really great because they wanted to be in on the research. Not only did they value the results of the research for their work, but they also participated in creating the research design. You know, what questions are we asked? What things are we going to show to people to get feedback? Coming up with ideas based on the results and that sort of thing. So it really just depends on the context of where I'm working and, you know, who else I'm working with. Okay, a bunch of people have asked about pay, and I've skipped that until now because people keep asking about it. So I don't want to give like specific numbers because it really depends on so many things. It depends on your experience and how convincing you are, you know, to tell someone to give you more money. It depends on so many different variables, but I would say that working in technology, design, business, and working specifically in a user experience role, you're able to make good money. And you should, because if you think about it, you're providing really valuable information to organizations to give them more success. So it's valuable, and you should be paid as such. And so I don't really know what else to say about it. If anyone has other very, more specific questions about rates and salaries and things like that, I'm happy to answer those offline.
Well, thank you. That was really awesome. I wonder, as maybe one final question, if you had any recommendations that you'd want to make about different graduate programs that might specialize in the U.S.
Can you say that, the last part, one more time? I couldn't hear you.
Sure. I wonder if you had any recommendations about graduate programs that might be particularly good for folks who want to check out training in this field, this subfield of anthropology.
Sure. So actually, if you go to, there's a book, it's called The Handbook of Anthropology in Business. It's by Rita Denny and Patricia Sunderland. They were the editors of this volume. It's a really awesome, big book full of chapters about doing this kind of work. There's a chapter in here, and I'm looking for it right now. It is, well, I'm not going to spend too much time for it, but there's a chapter in here that talks about all of the different programs that prepare students for this kind of work. And off the top of my head, and I'm sorry if I leave any out, but off the top of my head are University of North Texas, which has not only an in-person master's degree where you can focus on business and design anthropology, but they also have an online program. Let's see what else. Wayne State University. I have some colleagues who went there, and they have that particular focus at that place. And I can't remember any of the others, but there are a few. So check out that chapter in that book. And if you don't have the book or can't access it, then I can look in there and let you know personally.
Could you maybe repeat the name of that book just for those of us who didn't quite get to write it down?
The book is Handbook of Anthropology in Business. It just came out in 2014, I believe, and it's by Rita Denny and Patricia Sunderland. They are well-known names in business anthropology and have other books and articles as well, but there's a book, there's a chapter in there that talks about training programs specifically.
All right, terrific. Well, once again, I really appreciate your taking the time to do this webinar today. Our next webinar is going to be scheduled for March 23rd with Katie Hind, and we will, for so many people who asked, we will attempt to have this online on our webinar homepage at www.americananthro.org. We'll try to get it up within the week or so, as soon as I can get to it. And again, thank you everyone who participated today, and thank you especially Amy for this fabulous presentation. And we'll call it a day then, I think. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks, Vernon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.